Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, proudly presented by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. If you're like us and passionate about hunting, spearfishing, and many other outdoor-related pursuits, with an eagerness to fast-track your learning, then this podcast is perfect for you. G'day legends, and welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. Today's episode touches on two super fun, very new forms of hunting for us here at Twin Elements. As many of you guys would know, our version of hunting virtually always includes a bow and arrow. Well, today, James and I are going to switch it up and we're going to discuss shooting sharptails and coyotes. This hunt took place for us while we were over in the United States, in Montana specifically. Whilst we were primarily hunting for deer, elk and pronghorn with our bows, we managed to sneak in a few moments spare and basically undertake in some upland bird hunting with dogs, as well as undertake some predator control, as you'll hear. Catch all the action on this episode of the Twin Elements podcast, and without further ado, we'll jump into the episode. Introducing the Walk and Stalk Carbon Game Bar and Lift Kit. Lightweight, rugged, and with multi-function design, it's an incredible 7-in-1 do-it-all tool, with benefits before the kill, during the hunt, as well as when the animal hits the deck. Use as a trekking pole in rough terrain. Spot game easier with the monopod-like function. Shoot from a stable rest with the V-shape stabilization. Attach a smartphone or camera for self-filming and photography. Drag critters with ease and haul to a convenient location. Prop the legs open for gutting or disarticulating the hams. And finally, hang the animal using their compact pulley lift kit. Easily lifting game animals up to 200 kilograms in weight. We have tested it on chital deer and fallow deer here in Australia. Used it in the USA on a range of game animals such as mule deer, pronghorn, and even a bull elk. Want to try it for yourself? Use code TWIN15 at checkout for 15% off your next order. These are absolutely essential for those hunters looking to maximize field butchery and have cleaner, more hygienic meat back at home for the freezer. Alrighty, so as you would have seen in the title when this episode was released, it's been released or labelled as a semi-live hunt or semi-live podcast. So this here is a bit of a disclaimer because unfortunately this episode was originally recorded on the 26th of September. It was a live episode, as I've said, being recorded on a little dirt road somewhere in the middle of Montana in the USA. It was 1 a.m. at the time, and James and I were headed back from what was an eventful night of hunting coyotes. Unfortunately, as sometimes is the case, once arriving home in Australia after the trip, so around October, James and I realised that the audio file was unfortunately corrupted, and unfortunately that meant we couldn't, extract that live recount from the field, from the road at 1 a.m. So unfortunately, here I am in Australia after the fact, obviously recording this podcast from home. I'm much less tired, which is a good thing because we were obviously burning the candle at both ends. But I'm also probably less excited as that raw sort of semi-live recount would have been delivered, and you would have obviously seen that it would have been much more adrenaline filled being, on the way home from the events. But one benefit, however, as it's obviously after the case, as I've said, I can sort of add in some information that we probably did skip over that night as we were driving back to camp. So what we'll do here is we'll actually begin this podcast with a bit of an introduction to upland bird hunting and Sharptail grouse. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Sharptail grouse or upland bird hunting, we'll give you guys a bit of information and some hunting statistics here. So specifically for upland birds, the upland game bird license is needed to hunt upland game bird species such as grouse, partridge, pheasant, turkeys, and other species where applicable in the United States. For the 2025 Upland Bird Game License, residents of the United States or that specific state pay US dollars $7.50, which is extremely cheap, to then get the opportunity to have that license and then be able to hunt those species that we mentioned. For non-residents, to have a bird license, it's $110 US. But luckily for James and I, when we applied for our deer and elk tags in Montana, you actually get the Upland bird game license as part of that package, which is a real benefit because it then made us applicable to do this form of hunting. So one thing to note, as with most of the licenses and things in the United States, is that the sale of the Upland game bird licenses directly contributes to the Upland Game Bird Enhancement Program, which is basically just a setup where their goal is to improve habitat, allow increased public access for upland bird game hunting, and basically just make the whole system a lot more sustainable, which is something that we currently lack here in Australia with a lot of our obviously feral and introduced animals, taking into account that these are a native species in North America. But it is just a concept that I encourage people to think about more, where, the more you can hunt an animal and obviously take out the meat, do all these things right and ethically, and then obviously support the greater ecosystem, is something that, sets up a greater system. And that's something that the United States do really, really well as part of obviously this bird hunting, but their greater system of the big game management and hunting that they afford their citizens. So what we'll do now is we'll jump into the Sharptail Grouse, I guess, biology and a little bit about their habits and just some information that I think is important to sort of better understand this species for those of you that haven't seen them or aren't familiar. So the Sharptail Grouse is native to large parts of North America, including Montana, obviously. The species prefers sort of mixed grass prairie area or shrubby grassland habitats. Upon our travels and our hunting, and bow hunting in particular, we commonly saw them in the open areas with sparsely populated sage, sort of mostly on the ridge tops. But what we did note is that once the actual hunting season for the birds started and more hunters rocked up, with their dogs and semi-automatic shotguns, James and I definitely seemed to find that the birds, where they were visible in open areas, they definitely went and hid down in the draws a little bit more, whether that was also because the weather sort of was getting quite hot and warm. But these areas tended to be more thicker and have a bit more dense sort of cover and brush. So, which makes sense, obviously, if they're getting hunted more and from one day, say August 30th, they're not getting hunted, and then September 1st, they start getting hunted, those birds are going to react to that pressure and obviously seek, a bit of a refuge. So the Sharptails, their diet is omnivorous. So, once successful in this Sharptail hunting, we would pretty readily observe the crops of the birds just to get a bit of an insight into what they were eating. And we did this simply by cutting open their crop, which, again, for those of you that aren't familiar, the crop is almost like a bit of a storage bin just prior to the stomach of these birds. And it acts as an area where they store their food essentially before it's digested. So cutting that open with birds that we harvested, we observed food items such as crickets, a lot of varying sort of leaf material from a wider range of plants, and quite commonly like an assortment of wild berries. And obviously, not being from Montana, we can only really speculate. But one berry, I guess, that was of note, particularly to like our companions and the fellow bird hunters that we were with on this trip, they kept referring to these berries that they were seeing and quite excited about as Russian olives, which I don't think, I try to Google it, doesn't seem to be like a common name. I think that's more of a slang term for this particular plant, but they called it a Russian olive. And we'll talk about that in a sec here, because it turned out to be pretty eventful that they knew where a few particular trees were, and that's where they sort of then obviously, once they'd shot a bird with Russian olives, knew that if they were feeding there, and they feed in their little groups, that it was a likely area to then go and obviously target their efforts and try and take a few animals or these Sharptails to fill their bag limit for the day. So one thing of note as well is that Sharptails are said to be quite an important indicator species of like the overall grassland health. And a reason for this is just because they require large undisturbed habitat. and also respond very negatively to overgrazing or any altered habitat management. So say if someone goes and builds a big car park on a otherwise, normal grassland area, the birds are going to disperse and it's going to affect their breeding habits and things like that. And then you'll obviously see a decline in population. And I guess from some of the reading that I was doing and things, being an important indicator species, if the sharptail numbers are doing really well, then you might also have enough habitat there that's like supporting animals like the mule deer and certain little mammals or other bird species and amphibians and whatever else there may be. So that's just something to understand. Again, not necessarily for sharptails, but here in Australia, when you're looking at other wildlife and species and things, and just being mindful of, everything plays its role in that greater ecosystem. The conservation status of this bird species, the Montana Natural Heritage Program ranks the population as secure, which is interesting, just because anecdotally, we heard this quite a lot from a lot of the hunters that we were like both with, I guess, that we were sharing camp with across like our hunts and adventures over there, as well as hunters that we met across different areas of the units or where we were filling up fuel and going into town. And if we ran into people that, we got into conversation with, even to the point where a lot of the ranchers and farm hands that we met, all of them had said numerous times across like the month that we were there that the numbers of sharptail were certainly down this year compared to 2024 particularly, and even years past. So many of the hunters had termed the hunting to be harder than normal, with a lot less sharptails in each covey. And again, for those that aren't familiar, using the word there, covey, a covey, I guess, is simply a term used to describe like a flock of birds. I think it's from the order of birds like galliforms, which is basically like your chickens, turkeys, like quail, other land sort of birds, not land birds, but typically like the heavy ground feeding birds. So yeah, which fits very well with your turkeys and chickens and all that type of stuff. So getting into describing the birds and these grouse, sharptails in particular are around 15 to 20 inches in length, with a mottled sort of grey to brown coloration. And I guess for any images and what they look like, or if you're trying to picture what they look like, just make sure you head to the Twin Elements Instagram page. We've been posting recently a heap of images of, the people that we hunted with, some of the photos of these successful hunts, as well as some images of Sharptail grouse. So go back to there and check those out. But back to the hunting side of things, as I said earlier, the season for Sharptail grouse in Montana opened on September 1st and typically runs through until January 1st. So we pretty much arrived in the thick of early hunting, which was great. And knowing this, the daily bag limit was set at 4 birds per person with a total possession limit of 16 birds. And to make sense of that, if you're out hunting for a week, you've obviously got 7 days of hunting. The maximum number of birds you can have in your possession is 16, even though, if each day you shot 4 birds, that would be, say, 28 birds for the week. That wouldn't be allowed. You're only allowed 16 total, or 4 per day. So if you went out for 3 days and shot 4 birds each day, you would fill your bag limit and go home with 12 birds. That's legal, that's fine. But yeah, you obviously couldn't go out for 5 days and shoot 4 birds a day, because that would be 20 birds, which would put you over that possession limit, which is important to understand. But again, this year, in conjunction with the apparent down numbers and filling a bag limit each day, it was proving to be pretty difficult. Like, whilst we were hunting and trying to fill, whether it was a pronghorn tag, deer tags, elk tags, whatever it was that we had, and we were bow hunting primarily at the beginning of our adventure. Our friends who had been hunting this patch of turf for some 30 odd years, they continued to sort of describe that, it was really challenging hunting, so much so that, there were some days that in the past years when there were, coveys of 10, 20, 30 birds, so little flocks of 20 to 30 birds, even up to 100 birds, they said, in some really, really good years. This year they were only seeing like 5 or 6, maybe 3 or 4. And, in previous years where they'd only had to travel a few hundred meters away from the car on the very first walk of the day, and they'd shoot 4 birds, resulting in obviously cleaning birds with a coffee an hour or two after sunlight or daybreak. This time they were hunting all day, pretty hard, and sometimes getting back to camp only shooting, 1 or 2 birds each, which again just speaks to they obviously know the areas and where these birds sort of inhabit after being on these, areas in this unit for a long, long time. As I said, 30 years. Some of them were kids when they first started hunting, now are adults with their own kids. But it just goes to show, like, they've obviously noticed that this was a bit of a down year, which is something that James and I probably didn't realize until we spoke to other people. Because, again, I think whether it's potentially us hunting with the bow and maybe being a bit slower, quieter, walking in areas where other people aren't, or particularly maybe even going that extra mile looking for whether it was the elk, pronghorn or deer, we seem to find quite a lot of birds, which I guess will sort of, get us into this next little chapter of the story.
If you have ever thought of overseas travel and hunting in the United States, then listen up. Whether it be an annual trip or a once-in-a-lifetime adventure, Hunting Full and the consultancy team will cater for your needs. I've been utilising their service for a couple of years now and could not be happier with it. The whole team, from the admin staff to their hunt advisors, has been a pleasure to work with. Hunting Full not only helped me draw one of the best tags in Montana, but we sat down and had multiple meetings to construct a hunt strategy to ensure I had the best hunt possible. If you're interested in using Hunting Full's license application services to draw more tags across the Western United States, email applications@huntingfull.com. That is APPLICATION@HUNTINFOOL.com and mention Twin Elements to get 25% off your first year of service. The Hunting Full team will take care of the rest.
Alrighty, so you guys have heard a little bit of background there, but let's get into a few Sharptail stories of our own. So my experience coming into this hunt was at a base level, I would say. In fact, it couldn't have really been any lower or any less experienced. Not only was it sort of true that I guess I had never ever hunted Sharptails previously, I'd never actually even shot a shotgun or used a shotgun. I'd sort of obviously been around them a little bit and known what they were like. I'd actually heard stories from James about his efforts to sort of try and shoot a sharptail from his previous few hunts in Montana over the previous few years. And it was fair to say that James actually painted that, it was quite difficult. Again, not necessarily the sharptail hunting, but more the fact that going from a bow and only ever using a bow and not really even using rifles very much to then go over to the US where it's all legal to use different rifles and firearms and things like that, and then go and use a semi-auto, it's quite difficult. And if you're not, I guess, coordinated enough, not familiar enough with, safety mechanisms and all these types of things, it can quickly become quite difficult when you're then trying to fast forward everything and you've got a bird flying away at 50 yards and you're trying to shoot it before it gets out of sight. So this first hunt of the trip, James and I were actually behind the cameras, and we actually followed our friend Michael, who you'll probably hear a little bit about over the next few podcasts. And Michael is very much responsible for getting James and I over to Montana and hunting this particular area. He was really good enough to introduce James to this area. His hospitality was second to none. He's become a really, really close friend and has supported us on our hunting adventures over there. To a level that is uncanny. His selflessness is truly amazing. But he brought along his 2 dogs, Leela and Quinn, and we basically set off one afternoon following Michael around the sage flats in search of grouse. And immediately the first things that I noticed as someone that had never been on a bird hunt was probably the pace. I think I thought it was just going to be like this leisurely sort of stroll over the sage flats looking for birds. I had no idea that it was basically like this little trot where you're pretty much in between a fast-paced walk and a bit of a jog running across the sage flats in this open prairie country the whole time. And The second thing I think I noticed that was really, really cool to watch, and something that I paid particular interest in, was just the relationship between, the gunman or the person hunting and the dogs, and just watching the dogs, like watching their tail flick, watching if they went left or right, and the way that Michael commanded and summoned the dogs with whether it was a vocal cue or a visual cue, like pointing a certain direction. It was honestly magical to watch, and like I'm really excited that we got to film this, and it'll be part of the USA film that we release, and all the content and some of the shorts and things that we release will be really cool. But that was just one of my major or key takeaways, was just the relationship that Michael had with his dogs was incredible. And he'd obviously put a lot of time in, as any good dog owner and dog trainer does. But I think getting a dog, as most of us here in Australia are familiar with, to sit, to stay, to wait for its dinner, to shake, to do all these sort of comical, levels of training and commands, and then being able to actually take that and do it with a working dog. And as you'll see in the footage, Michael runs, a line of golden retrievers, and they're truly beautiful dogs in the sense of they are pets, but they also work and are working dogs. And these dogs, it was amazing, like to see and to witness. And I really encourage anyone, if you've never been bird hunting, it's something that I want to get into more simply from experiencing this. Just the ability to like cover ground. And we obviously, when we were bow hunting, were very strategic about where we would go and try not to put extra scent on the ground. Whereas with the bird hunting, you're using these dogs, like you're walking a line, and then every 20 to 30 meters left and right and zigzagging, these dogs are just moving through the sage. And if they're smelling any scent of, where these sharptails have been, they're zigzagging it and doing tens of meters to our every step. So just the ability of the dogs to cover ground, it was really actually quite difficult. And I thought bird hunting would be easy in the sense that you just walk, a bird flushes, you shoot it, walk, bird flushes, you shoot it. But the decision making that actually went into all of this was probably one of the things where I was like, again, it kind of comes back to maybe not necessarily having views on things that you haven't probably done or undertaken before. And again, it can be, you hear it, for example, this is probably a bad example, but you hear, rifle hunting's easy compared to bow hunting. And it's like, that might be the case, but until you actually go and rifle hunt and work out, certain things, whether it's gear relationships, sighting in that rifle, getting efficient with the rifle, hunting the particular deer with that rifle, learning ballistics, projectiles, blah, 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 whatever it is, there's so much complexity to like whatever you do in life. And I guess just going into things with like an open mindset is really important, because I think for me, like I never would have pictured bird hunting over particularly, going and trying to shoot an elk that afternoon with James's tag or something like that. But I just want to, pass on that message, I guess, that by doing this new thing, it was absolutely awesome and really eyebrow raising. And this whole hunt, I guess, and covering all this ground and the pace that we were running at, it was all done in around 90-degree Fahrenheit weather over there in the US. So around 30 degrees Celsius for all the Australians listening to this. So as you can tell, it was quite warm, and you're running up and down these little hills and at quite a bit of a pace. And, quickly the afternoon got away from us, and basically we were hot, sweaty, running around with very limited water and hadn't had much to turn up. We hadn't actually seen a bird right up until the last part of this hunt. And I'll go ahead and say that we finished the hunt with a single bird. And this particular hunt, again, you'll be able to see it when you guys watch the Twin Elements videos on YouTube, but it was an awesome, awesome effort between Michael, who was shooting, and Leela, his dog, who was sort of the lead dog. She's a little bit younger, and he's actually the offspring of his older dog, Quinn. So what was really cool to watch was just Michael sort of reading and calling out her mannerisms and like her keenness on a particular patch of scrub that we'd sort of seen in this thick draw. And he just was like, nah, there's a bird in there. And she went through it and sort of tried to flush out a bird, was almost getting like a bit frustrated, like, oh, there's plenty of fresh scent, but I want to move on and keep looking for this bird. It's not in here. And he just went like, no, go back. And Leela and commanded her and was like, walk through it again. And she walked through it again. And he had this super close flush where the single sharptail basically flew out of this really tight patch of draw country and some thick brush, and he ended up shooting it at like 20 yards, 10 yards, whatever it was, and captured it on film. And it was then just cool to, I guess, get a bit of reward for effort for the dogs, because it'd been a pretty hot, laboursome walk, as I said. But the second thing was just watching the immediate response of that bird, hearing the rifle, watching the bird. The dog ran up, Leela grabbed it, brought it back to her master and put it in Michael's hands on a command, and he dispatched the bird quickly and basically celebrated it, gave the dog some water, and we continued for the afternoon. We didn't know it was going to be the only bird, but it was. And it kind of just made it even more sweet, the fact that, we'd worked so hard for one bird. And I kind of like the fact that we weren't just gifted this, hunt where we basically went out and cleaned up and he shot his 4 birds, and then James or I stepped in and we shot a bird or 2 each or filled our bag, and it was just super easy. So watching that was a really good introduction to sharptail hunting for me. And a few days later, we finally actually got our own, hand at shooting for James and I, after a much needed break from bow hunting, as it turned out, because we, to be honest, were hunting pretty hard leading up to this little hunt. And that's actually sort of where this hunt begins. With innovative and patented designs, Eberlestock are industry leaders when it comes to packs. Being avid hunters who delve into the backcountry, we require durable, customizable, and reliable gear to get us into the mountains. We have been running their mainframe E-mod system with the Vapor 5000 pack and attachments. Their bino harness or chest rig with attachments like rangefinder and accessory pouches have been a game changer for run and gun style of hunts. We've recently returned from America and felt the weight of packing out a big bull elk, handling the antlers and meat easily, and can honestly say that they're the best packs we've ever used. If you're interested in feeling the same comfort and upgrading your pack setup today, check out Eberlestock, either online through their website or available in-store at Venture Hunting Outdoors here in Australia. So James and I had actually walked this particular area the previous day. I was actually hunting with the bow in hand, searching for a mule deer buck, as it was my last remaining tag on this adventure. And whilst the deer were sort of proving to be pretty elusive, the grouse on this occasion actually proved to be pretty abundant in this little particular draw system that James and I had walked. And we finished that hunt, didn't really see any mule deer bucks that we were interested in. It was now sort of the middle part of the day, and we went back to camp, met up with Michael, and we devised a bit of a plan to go back and head to that same draw system and walk it with Michael and the dogs. So by the time we actually went around to doing that, it was actually the day after, and we'd 24 hours later, I guess, and we were a little bit worried that the birds might have moved off, because we'd gone and chased elk that previous afternoon. The next morning, I think I hunted mule deer, and then it got to lunchtime again, and we were like, oh, it would be a good time to just go and try and fill in the day. Let's go and try and maximize opportunities and hunt some upland birds. So we rock up to this spot. We end up deciding that based on the way the wind was going, we were going to park in a certain spot and walk down the draw, just to get the wind in our face and give the dogs the best opportunity. And honestly, nearly immediately, the dogs started showing signs that birds were in the area, which James and I weren't sure if that was because they were there yesterday, but Michael assured us that, this is like them acting like there's, birds right here. They're super, super keen, super interested, being in such a dry land sort of environment on that, not desert-like stuff, but on that open prairie where it's quite sunny, there's no shade. Any scent from the birds probably would have dried up and sort of dissipated over 24 hours. So the fact that the dogs were, noses to the ground, tails wagging, running very sharp, eccentric sort of zigzags back and forth, it kind of meant that there were birds in the area. And sure enough, it's funny, like I remember vividly being super, super nervous. Like one about just you're moving at this fast pace with this shotgun in your hands, chucking it from, your left hand to right hand, because quite frankly, like it gets pretty heavy carrying around this big solid sort of construction, and you're running around almost half bicep curling this gun and running over sage and trying not to point it at anyone, obviously, and have good muzzle control, safety's on, all this type of stuff. But you're watching the dogs, trying to stay close enough to Michael and the other people, close enough to the dogs, not get too far ahead, not too far behind. You're doing all this stuff. And then in the back of my mind, I'm also sitting there going like, shit, I've literally never shot a shotgun. I haven't even been able to have a practice go. And now I'm meant to be able to like flick the safety off, get my finger on the trigger, shoulder the shotgun, bring it to my eye, put my cheek on the muzzle and look down at, put the bead on the bird and shoot the bird before it flies off. And, you know, it's just like that was all going through my head. But at the same time, I'm trying to be like super relevant and like, I guess, present and be like, no, I just back my instincts. I've always been good at sports and somewhat coordinated. And I was like, how hard can it be? And it's funny because it basically was textbook. What sort of, you know, occurs next was 3 shots and 3 birds. And to go into a little bit more detail than that, we're sort of walking down, and I'm watching this dog, and I'm watching Leela. She's sort of the lead dog, doing the most walking and running around, and she's just like nose to the ground like a beagle. You can imagine like hound hunting or, you know, something like that, like a pointer. And she's doing these sharper and sharper little turns, and I'm sort of started looking ahead, and I actually think I saw the bird move before it flew. It must have run across the ground, but it was probably like 30 to 40 yards ahead. And I just remember like pushing in. So the way that the safety is for a right-hander with these guns or the shotguns, you hold the sort of barrel, I guess, with your left hand. Just behind the trigger mechanism is this little button safety mechanism that you push in with your thumb, where you're holding with your right hand under the, I guess, stock. Don't hold me to this. I'm not really good with firearms and parts and anatomy of a gun, but you basically, with your finger under the trigger or sitting on the trigger slide, use your thumb. If you can imagine, you're pointing like a pistol right now with your right hand. Simultaneously, you're holding the gun in front of you. You push with your right hand thumb. You push that little safety off, bring the gun up towards your cheek, and then your finger or trigger finger comes across off the guard and down onto the trigger, and you gently squeeze as that bird lines up. The bead, lines up on the bird. And that all happened instantaneously. And as that bird got up and was flying away, I just went poof and shot. And it was pretty surreal to watch, you know, feathers just burst into the air, hear Michael screaming, "Nice job, good work, good dog, get the bird, get the bird." And like I didn't know if he was talking to me, talking to the dog, whatever. And as like I'd shot, it's all happening in microseconds here. Another 2 or 3 birds go past, and this is meant to be a semi-auto shotgun. So I've gone poof, poof, and try to, in my head, you know, follow the rest of the birds and get a second and a third on the ground. And I looked down because I didn't hear any shots. And what had happened was the bullet or the shotgun shell of the second, which was trying to load in there automatically or semi-automatically, had basically got caught. It had sort of, become obstructed, and which was a bit of a spew because I felt like I really had a good bead on that second and third bird, and unfortunately the gun didn't go off, but it was safe currently to do so. Like nothing was, you know, the dogs were behind me, Michael and James were behind me, it was all good. I simply just fixed that up, and then that round or shell loaded, and I was ready to go and, you know, claim this bird that I'd shot. So at that point, everything had settled. I clicked the gun back to, you know, safety with my thumb. Michael and James are like celebrating. In the meantime, Leela's brought the bird back to Michael, who's behind me now, and they're dispatching the bird. I'm sort of sitting there like making sure the gun's all safe, taking it all in, going, holy shit, that just happened. And I actually see, again, I don't know if it's just a keen eye and with the bow hunting, but I just see an odd shape like 60 yards in front of me. And I like look back at Michael and I said, "Are you guys coming? I think there's more birds." And he goes, yeah, we'll be there in a second. And I remember just not even whispering. It wasn't like we were bow hunting like a mammal or a deer or something. I just didn't know how good the bird's hearing was, obviously. And I just yelled back like, can you shoot them on the ground? And I'm definitely by no means a purist. Like, my interest in hunting these upland birds was primarily to try and eat them and taste them and just see what it was about. And I might get a bit of, a hit back or a slap back for this, but he yelled back like, yeah, of course. And I could literally only see the head of this grouse at 60 yards. And I just put the bead on its head, squeezed the trigger and shot. And it was funny because I just watched that bird flop to the ground. And then as I shot, I watched as Leela, the dog, who had obviously been with Michael and sort of started reworking again, coming up to me, saw the shot, and her instinct was just to run forward and retrieve. And as she's run forward and retrieved, she's actually put up more birds between me and that bird that I just shot at 60 yards. And it was funny because these birds probably raised about 40 to 50 yards in front of me, just in front of where I'd shot that bird on the ground. And I just remember, like, again, as if slow motion, watching, going, yep, I've still got 2 out of 4 shots remaining. Or 3 shots, whatever it was. Started tracking one of the birds, and I was like, in my head, I'd come to the decision that it was too far, as like on the fly, as a new hunter, I didn't want to take that shot. And then I just heard whether it was James or Michael go, shoot it. And I laughed because it was honestly comedic, like, and so surreal. Like, all of this is happening so fast and in microseconds. And I just remember it so vividly, like the ability for our brain to capture all these details and store it as like a core memory now is just like uncanny. But this grouse is like the last one of its group flying away at like 50 or 60 yards now. And I'm tracking it. And again, I must have felt confident because I was tracking it, leading it slightly. And I just squeezed off the shot. And sure enough, that bird just got hit. Some feathers flew, and almost in slow motion, it was like watching a helicopter come to the ground. That Sharptail hit the ground, and Michael basically summoned the dog to go and retrieve it. And it was so cool to be able to watch again like that transpire. And this bird, I think because of the range, like I was told that it was a good shot, but because of the range, it wasn't like, it hadn't expired and not as, incapacitated as the previous 2 birds that I'd shot, one being a complete headshot at 60 yards and the other one maybe being 20 or 30 yards away and taking the brunt of the shotgun at close range. They were basically down out for the count and barely even flapped, whereas this one was flapping and trying to make its getaway. But it was just good to watch the bird obviously go and retrieve it. And again, credit to the bird. Like, there's no way that we probably would have gone over and been able to find it in amongst all the sage and all the terrain and cover and stuff if those dogs weren't there. So it just goes to show obviously the importance of the dogs and the relationship that we have with them when doing this upland bird hunting. But yeah, even recounting this story now, like, I feel like I've got goosebumps. Like, it was just so surreal and such a cool experience that I genuinely really, really loved and enjoyed. But that hunt was amazing. As I said, I took 3 shots, shot the 3 birds from pretty much like a 10-meter area. And with that, I swapped out and grabbed the video camera, and James swapped in. And basically on the return walk back to the car, we ended up doing a bit of a wider loop to hunt sort of the escapees or the birds that had flown up and over the ridges, and basically hunted another draw that ran sort of parallel with the draw that we were back towards the car. And what was really cool is that I know that James had a bit of hardship when sort of hunting the grouse previously, whether it was a combination of them flying from too far or just not being familiar with the shotgun and stuff. But he was able to sort of redeem himself, and with a couple of shots, we ended up getting, I think it was like 5 grouse for the afternoon. So James ended up bagging a couple of birds, and it was really, really cool to go back and, we then processed them and got to cook them. And to finish up on the Sharptail front, I quickly wanted to speak about their table fare, because that was part of the reason why we, wanted to hunt these birds. And, one night in camp with our new friends that we'd met over there in Montana, we were actually treated to, a traditional type of meal that they, I guess, somewhat religiously prepare when they're all in bird camp. They do this every year. They go to this spot and they hunt the grouse. So that particular dinner was a mix of wild rice with, like a simple sort of sauce or a bit of a gravy, and they seared the Sharptail and sort of prepared that on top of that bed of rice. And what they used was the breasts, and on this occasion, they sort of cooked it. And to be honest, the meat or the flesh of the Sharptails is like a beautiful red meat. It almost looks very, very similar to like a piece of venison backstrap, I'd say. And on this occasion, they, charred it or cooked it pretty quick, almost as if you would venison, and seared it. And then on the inside, it was still a little bit pink and quite moist. And it was a beautiful and very rich meat. So that was a lovely dinner. And then on another occasion, after the guys had shot a few more birds and we were lucky enough to share in some of the animals that they harvested, on another occasion, we actually cooked a version of the Sharptail, which sort of resembled what I'd most liken to like a chicken schnitzel, but sort of probably more moist rather than like a dry crumb. And I guess if you want to substitute the chicken with this wild alternative, the results were pretty similar. So they, I think from what we gathered, used a bit of like flour, almost milk, and some seasonings. And rather than almost go from what we do here in Australia with like, a lot of the fish that we batter and use in like panko crumbs and stuff, where we go from like flour to egg to panko, or a chicken schnitzel where you go from flour, egg, whatever sort of, whether it's breadcrumbs or panko or whatever. We actually coated these Sharptail breasts in this thick sort of batter-like, and they combined it all to be like almost like a pancake, like uncooked pancake sort of consistency, and then take that sort of wet marinade or batter and shallow fried it in a little bit of oil. And honestly, it was one of the best things we've eaten, especially while in the USA, and it definitely justified hunting those glorious little birds. Like Sharptail were definitely, not a very gamey bird. It was very nice, very sort of modest meat, and I'm glad we ended up getting to hunt them. So unsurprisingly, like most things in the great outdoors, like with a new experience for me, hunting these Sharptails with dogs, it was actually one of the highlights of the trip for me, and being able to run around, talk, laugh, watch the relationship and the camaraderie, as said again, between, the relationship of the dogs and the hunters was really, really refreshing. And I think part of the reason, one of my biggest takeaways maybe, or perhaps the reason I liked it so much, was the fact that it was so, so, so different and contrasting to, I guess, the bow hunting that James and I sort of had been experiencing and undertaking for most of this trip. Again, now that I'm back, I can say that we were away for, 30 odd days, bow hunting every morning, getting up at 4:30, getting back after dark, which was like 8 p.m. Doing that on repeat gets very, very tiring. And being able to sort of go and do this Sharptail hunting at absolutely any time of the day and find success. And if you wanted to have a sleep in, if it was desired, and then quickly and easily go and clean the birds. It's not like you're packing out a big elk. Being able to cook it with the crew and hunt with the crew, and just share in the success with up to 10 people rather than just James and I was actually really, really good fun. And it's something that, I now want to book a trip to America again and make sure that I get that Upland bird license and go and do this hunt, because it's such a fun little adventure and something that I never thought would have this, great of an impact on me. As I said earlier, like really core memories. So very, very fun was the Sharptail hunting.
The Hunting Australia Facebook group is now a club that you can join. Members get access to discount codes from leading businesses. You can acquire your New South Wales R licence membership, and every month they run incredible giveaways with thousands of dollars worth of top tier gear, but also give away guided hunts as well. So if you want to learn from the best, or go in the running to win some incredible gear, or maybe a hunt of a lifetime, or just want to be part of the greater hunting community, make sure to join the Hunting Australia group. Use code TWINELEMENTS to get 10% off your membership.
Alrighty, so we have discussed upland bird hunting for Sharptails. Now we're going to shift the discussion and the topic of this podcast to coyotes in particular, and basically just predator control. So Again, we'll start off with some biology and information on coyotes for those of you who aren't familiar. Again, going into this trip, I was by no means informed about them at all. It was something that in previous trips to Montana, I'd seen a couple from a distance, but I'd never actually got to see them up close, didn't really know much about them, had heard whispers, and everything that I knew about them was pretty much gospel from either the people that I'd met over there, the odd documentary or, social media post or other podcasts and stuff. So after actually doing a bit more with them and sort of being in their habitat, touching one in the flesh, all that type of stuff, I've come back and for my own interest, I've sort of done a bit of research, which I'll translate here. So coyotes are said to be common and widespread across much of Montana. Their adaptability means that they can survive in grasslands, the badlands, or that breaky type of country where we were hunting for a lot of these mule deer. They can also hunt forest edge habitat similar to where we've previously hunted in the mountains with those big pines and all that type of stuff, all the way through to suburban fringes and even residential areas. So one of the biggest things when considering all this is a coyote's diet is extremely varied. So commonly, they eat small mammals such as rodents and rabbits. That's what a lot of people picture. But all the way through to deer and pronghorn, which we actually came to see quite evidently on our adventures. It's also important to note that they will also eat birds, berries, sometimes even livestock or pets in residential areas, and definitely out here on the prairie and other areas, especially during winter. We had a lot of farmers actually say that anecdotally, the worst time when the coyotes cause the most damage is those first few days where the calves, cattle like Angus calves, are being born, and they won't necessarily go up and physically kill, the calves. Most of the calves are born pretty healthy. What they do is during the winter when there's a lot of snow on the ground and the cattle can't really move much, when a fresh calf is born, they'll obviously go and smell those membranes, fluids, all that type of stuff, the fetal birthing juices and whatnot, be attracted to it, and then they'll go and actually form tight rings and circles and basically just agitate the cows to the point that those cows, which are tired, restless, probably a little bit confused, are trying to kill the coyote and protect their calf. But what actually ends up happening subsequently is that those cows go and basically trample accidentally their calves. And what happens is those coyotes will then wait a day or two for that calf, which now has, a broken rib, internal bleeding, some bruises, damage, can't get up because its leg's been broken from the weight of its mother or whatnot. And that calf will basically just either die of starvation, exposure, sickness, disease, whatever it may be. And that's when the coyotes will actually go and, then eat the carrion and the carcasses and things. So, that's where even during archery and rifle hunting seasons, coyotes will commonly eat and search for carrion and carcasses, of animals that people have successfully taken, whether it's like a bull elk and then there's a big gut pile. And again, for this reason, they can quite readily be described as like omnivorous opportunists. So pretty much eating whatever and wherever it is. So most of their actual hunting is done alone or in pairs from what I've read, yet they can still form small family groups when the pups are maturing. And that sort of brought us into early in the fall season in September when we were hunting. We had on one instance on this hunt where we actually disturbed, I think it was like 5 individual coyotes in one little draw system. And there was actually like a kill which they'd scattered, and I'm assuming it was from a mule deer fawn or like a yearling or something like that, scattered in the sage and the bushes in this draw. But you couldn't find a skull, you couldn't find much. It was literally just like the odd hoof and like rib bones and things like that scattered in probably like a 20 to 30 meter or radius of area. But, that was 5 animals running out of this tight little draw. So they were obviously, whether it was a mum and dad that had killed the fawn, or yearling mule deer, and then the pups were eating it before they sort of dispersed, or whether it was like a pack of 5 animals hunting it and killing it. I'm not too sure, but it just does go to show that they obviously can cooperate and obviously be quite successful killing machines. Like we saw so much evidence of dead, large mammals, basically talking about more specifically like pronghorn does, mule deer does, mule deer fawns, all that type of stuff constantly throughout our journey over there in America. So as for actual body size of these coyotes, the males are typically larger, generally between 25 to 40 pounds, or to convert for our Aussie audience, like 10 to probably 18 kilos. So with females, being slightly smaller, more so between that 9 to 15 kilos, so a couple of kilos lighter. And again, for our Aussie listeners, that's probably the size of like a solid kelpie in most instances, maybe like a thin or small sort of blue heeler, I guess. And one of the key things that I read was that they reproduce quite quickly. So often with 4 to 7 pups per litter in good years, which is most years when they're successful hunters and whatnot, which helps them sustain, high populations or pretty steady populations. And the pups, as I said earlier, are typically born in April, May, which is why we were seeing so many running around the prairies, because many of the pups that would have emerged from, their dens and burrows in April, May, or been born and then emerged in like June, July, just say, by the time it got to September, a lot of these animals were learning to hunt and actually establishing their own territories and probably like weaning off mum and dad. And this actually made for excellent opportunities for us to not only see them, but also try and hunt them. And we had a few close calls with the bow, never actually got it done, but did end up going and doing this predator control with the infrared stuff, which you'll hear about in a second. But in Montana specifically, coyotes are classified as non-game predators rather than game species. So as predators, they can essentially be taken year-round in virtually any season by both residents and non-residents, which is an important factor because that means that there are no bag limits. And on private lands, which is where we did the rifle hunting that you're about to hear about for these coyotes, the landowner permission was essential and required to obviously go and hunt. On public land, it's a different story. But again, because of their predator status and typical, season dates and bag limits that apply to big game species such as the deer and elk and pronghorn that we were hunting with the bow, this didn't apply to them, which meant that, if we saw a coyote with the bow or the rifle, it was fair game, which was pretty fun to have that, I guess, not tag burning in our pocket, but the ability to go and hunt them legally, and knowing that the ranchers really despise them and that a lot of the people, again, anecdotally say that they've been really bad for the local deer population. We were trying to obviously take one. But yeah, of interest, again, looking into it, just more so for my own curiosity. I'm sure some of you guys listening, guys and gals, might find it interesting. I've actually gone and found and collated some of the harvest estimates from Montana, which again, I just found to be interesting upon returning home to Australia. And partly I looked into it just because I was so intrigued by these animals and their difficulty to take, especially with the bow during the day, but also due to the sheer amount of coyotes that we actually saw while hunting for deer and elk. Like there were some mornings, again, probably the benefit of being perched up on daylight looking for elk from a bit of a vantage ridge, but we would see 4 or 5 coyotes each morning, and then you'd hear them at night, and then in the afternoons you'd see another 2 or 3 or whatever. And this information on harvest estimates comes from Montana's Fish, Wildlife and Parks, but their fur bearer program, which is like an annual report, this one specifically in 2023 was sort of the last data that I could find, estimated that the number of coyotes harvested in Montana was 10,769. So that 10,000 odd number or figure, I guess, is actually representative of a 35% decrease from the previous year's estimate. So again, for those of you that are listening, in 2023, 10,769 coyotes were harvested, which is 35% less than in 2022. So again, that's pretty interesting to me. Maybe that's, a bit of a trend. And again, speaking to some of these landowners, they reckon that the population of predators such as the coyotes is getting out of control. And again, it's probably worth noting here that while that data is accurate, according to the fur bearer program, and it's a quantifiable, I guess, harvest report. One thing that I do want to mention is that probably similar to most people here in Australia. Like I shoot X amount of chital deer each year, but I don't necessarily go and give that information to anyone. And certainly over there in America, they've got people that are hunting, they've got people that are shooting them as nuisance to livestock, they've got people that are probably trapping them for fur and things like that. So I doubt it. I probably would suggest that there's probably more farmers that are reporting, and contributing to that 10,000 animals being harvested, maybe even the trappers, because they can, notch down exactly when they catch one and at what date and what bait they were using and all that type of stuff. Whereas if someone's going out and shooting 7 a night and then, 3 the next day and 5 and blah, 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 they might not actually necessarily count that or, collate that information to the overall harvest report. So, that's just something to keep in mind. I've got no doubt that the number of coyotes actually shot each year in Montana far supersedes that 10,000 that I was talking about there. But either way, from my reports and from reading those reports and what we saw in our short time over there in the USA, we observed pretty solid numbers of coyotes. And to be honest, an interaction never really proved to be too far away, which sort of leads us into this story time that we'll get into very, very soon. See the unseen with Leupold Optics. Built for those who demand precision, durability, and clarity, Leupold Optics deliver relentless performance in the field. Trusted by hunters, shooters, and professionals worldwide. I'm currently running the BX4 Range HD 10x42 binoculars. Being able to spot game and then range them without changing between binoculars and rangefinder has been so convenient when hunting and guiding. It allows me to keep a clear field of view on the subject and then accurately read the distance to my clients in real time in the lead up to a shot. For binoculars, rangefinders, spotting scopes, or anything Leupold Optics related, be sure to check out Venture Hunting and Outdoors. The team at Venture stock the full range on their website and have many in store at their Brisbane megastore for you to check out today. Alrighty, so following suit, now that you guys have heard some of the background on coyotes similar to that of the Sharptail Grouse in the previous little segment, what we're going to do is jump into one hell of an experience with this little story. So, again, I would just like to, in the rare occasion that, one of the property owners who took us out on this hunt, if one of those guys are listening to the podcast, I'd obviously like to thank the people who organised this hunt and specifically to the ranchers who took us out. They let us borrow their gear. They showed us, the ins and outs of coyote hunting and basically, literally welcomed us into their homes. We met their families, had really cool conversations about Australia, the US. So James and I are obviously very grateful for their hospitality, as well as, just imparting their wisdom on us and letting us experience this, cool adventure, which you're about to hear. So what all of that looked like essentially was two very, very tired Australians. As you heard in the start of the show, James and I were burning the candle at both ends, sort of leading into this, waking up at 4:30 a.m. each morning, hunting extremely hard all day, trying to fill those tags. The last 2 tags that we actually had, which was, as I mentioned earlier, I had a mule deer tag and James had a bull elk tag in his pocket. And on this particular day, I think it was September 26th that I said earlier, we had just finished a hunt that evening. It was now getting dark, and rather than go back to camp, get a good night's sleep, eat some food, try and recover and restore ourselves for the following day where we'd be hunting, we travelled around 40 odd minutes in the opposite direction to camp from where we were hunting, and went down the road to a rancher's place where we'd had the invite to obviously go and hunt these coyotes. And rocking up, we were met by the rancher, our friend Michael, and quite frankly, an assortment of very, very impressive and also probably a little bit, intimidating tactical gear. And when I say tactical gear, it looked more like a military raid setup than a hunting trip or a little hunting expedition. So I'm talking huge, like massive, tall, yet sort of lightweight tripods. Mounted to each tripod, there were assault rifles. And just to be specific, there were two tripods, 2 assault rifles. If I'm not mistaken, those assault rifles were 10 rounds each. I think they were spitting out 2 4.3 projectiles coming out of those bad boys. So definitely suited to this style of hunting. Nice flat shooting rifle, perfect caliber for coyotes. Atop of those setups were infrared scopes or thermals. And we also had monoculars for, I guess, like searching for the coyotes if you weren't the one that was actually doing the shooting. So the last bit of gear that I wanted to mention was the electronic calling device. And this device was arguably the most important bit of gear. It stored hundreds of different calls on its software, I guess, and allowed for us to amplify these sounds across the prairie and essentially attract coyotes into our very specific location. So we went out, and the plan was to do all of this under the cover of darkness, and we ventured out and set up for our first stand or ambush, if you will. On the way out, we were instructed on how to go about, the setup. The rancher basically ran us through some rough tactics, but it was very much evident that it was a let's start doing it and learn on the job rather than, a very brief rundown prior. So the main takeaways were obviously safety with the weapons, good muzzle control, all that type of stuff. Safety on, very standard things when working around with firearms. Obviously just exaggerated because these are assault rifles and you put your finger on the trigger, it could fire 10 shots in less than 10 seconds. So the next big thing, which was relevant to the actual coyote hunting, was to limit movement, as these coyotes could particularly pick up on noise in particular, and then the movement of people and the shadows and stuff like that, and the silhouettes of us, like a number of people positioned in the moonlight on a ridge trying to call to these coyotes. And the last little bit of information that they told us is that these coyotes can come in extremely quickly and from quite far distances. So with all of that in mind, we were set up and hitting play on the caller at our first stand. So this initial setup was on an agricultural field. They had some sort of crop, whether it was lucerne or alfalfa or whatever it was. I can't really remember, but we were essentially down overlooking a bit of a draw, and surrounding that draw was a ridge line which fed into a big canyon, which is where we were told that the coyotes liked it, and we were assured virtually that this is a really good spot to sit and obviously let out the caller and try and see our first coyote. And it was sort of a mix of howls, pup distress calls. They seemed to be the main calls that we let out. And surveying the surrounding area through the monoculars, it was incredible to see how animals popped in the dark night. Like, again, for James and I, who primarily bow hunt, let alone, rifle hunt or do anything with firearms, it was really cool to experience thermals for like the first time and just see how efficient they are and how incredible those bits of gear are. And we were seeing animals like birds, we'd see deer, an array of other creatures. And one thing to note, I guess, and an important strategy is at this point, we didn't load any of the rifles. So we didn't load the rifles until the first call would play out. So you'd sort of get to your spot, work out where everyone was going to be looking, where everyone was going to be standing, make sure everyone's safe, no one moves without, instruction, just to keep things safe. You've got your shooting windows. We'd start playing the calls, and using the loud screeches or howls from the game caller, we would mask the sound of a round being chambered into the gun. And then over the top, that call would obviously continue as you've just chambered around. And it wasn't long before coyotes were heard in the darkness replying to our calls. And one thing that I took away from this was just how difficult it was to estimate distances out there where it's pitch black and you're seeing these tiny little white fragments and dots and things moving, and just even allowing for our eyes to adjust to the scopes and then to the monoculars and then you'd pass the binocular to someone else, or someone else would be on the rifle, and you're trying to sit there in the dark and be, a participant. It was really, really difficult. But what was cool is that through the binocular or through the scope, you could definitely see these coyotes from miles away. Like, it was very, very evident to see them from 3 to 4 miles away with this gear that we were using. So we were basically instructed to just sit back and wait, as sometimes their approach, like these coyotes that you'd see from 3 miles away, would take up to 15 minutes or so for them to come into range. And it was wild setting up multiple times throughout the evening, and nearly every single stand that we did, we had a coyote reply or come in, which, going into this hunt when we were driving there, James and I were pretty excited, like, oh, hopefully we'll even be able to see one, or hopefully one comes into the call. We didn't think that, let alone every stand we'd go to, we'd pretty much be getting a shot at one, let alone some coming into the actual call. So after calling at spot 1, this first setup for a few minutes, someone whispered, we've got one back here. Then, in all honesty, the next few seconds were a bit of a confusion for me. I was looking through the binocular, and as a coyote sort of raced into the caller from our 9 o'clock position and ran through, the clock face, if you can imagine, from left to right, going at 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. It then was nearly out of view, but it was only 20 meters away. And I'm watching all of this through the binocular, pretty fast paced. And that's when one of the ranchers yelled out, "I'm going to shoot," and basically fired away a shot at 20 meters. And it turns out, this was super unexpected and thrilling all the same. Quiet whispers turned to conversations, and it was pretty evident that he'd missed it, just in the rush of what was going on. No one was really prepared, but it was really, really cool, just seeing how quickly, we're watching coyotes in front of us, and then there's one behind us that just darts in and reacts to the call and is coming in at 20 meters. And if we don't shoot now, it's going to be out of view and all this type of stuff. And honestly, sitting there in the dark trying to take it all in, it was just exhilarating. And the main takeaways from this sort of failed, stalk or failed setup was that the person with the binocular, so me in this instance, needed to be watching the rear. And secondly, the next takeaway was, before we left that setup, we were actually introduced to the 3-2-1 bang sort of sequence or strategy. And for those that aren't familiar, the 3-2-1 tactic or sort of countdown, is pretty common, yet I would like to say rarely successful strategy utilized by hunters in all environments across the world. I know that, James and I, Dad and I, I've watched Dad and some of his hunting mates use it in the past. But basically it happens when there's 2 hunters and usually multiple animals. It's very, very common for a mob of feral pigs, and you've got, 2 hunters trying to shoot as many pigs as they can, often more than one, as quickly as possible without being, busted or whatever. So rather than one hunter, be the primary person shooting, take their shot, shoot a pig, and then the other person or the second hunter try and shoot at a running or disturbed animals. Hunter 1 and hunter 2 sit there together, and each hunter takes aim on either the same or a different animal in the mob, whispers 3, 2, 1, and on that countdown, when the number gets to 1 or whatever, however you want to agree on it, each person shoots. And in theory, it's magical. In reality, as I sort of have been alluding here, it rarely ever plays out correctly. And that's what brings us to, in this instance, our second coyote setup, number 2 or ambush number 2 for the night. So setup number 2, we basically do the same thing as the prior calling stand. Like, as I said, these guys have it down to a T, know exactly what they're doing, know what calls work, know where to go, have been doing it for years, and primarily just targeting coyotes that are receptive to coming in. So we set up the caller, get the guys all ready, and start waiting. And again, nearly immediately we spy 2 coyotes coming in hot from across the plains. At this point, they're approximately 1 mile away, and they're closing in pretty quickly. So again, at this point, it's said to me, and I'm actually now on a rifle. I've, been not relegated. What's the opposite? Promoted. I've been promoted to being on a rifle. So I've traded the monocular and being a bit of a bystander to now being on a rifle, one of those assault rifles. And I've been told to remember the 3, 2, 1. And when these coyotes that are coming in get closer, we're going to shoot them. And that's me on a rifle and one of the ranchers on the other rifle. So in this instance, less than 100 meters is said to be close. So these coyotes are about a mile away. And in agreement, I say that I obviously understand and proceed to sort of track the lead coyote that I can see at about a mile away through the site as they're running in pretty aggressively. So I'm watching on the laser rangefinder sort of within the thermal. It's like in the top left or top right. I can't really remember exactly, but I'm watching this range, reading out as it's cutting the distance from 100 yards from 1,000 yards to 600 to 300. And then suddenly this thing is at 100 yards. And at 100 yards, I consciously make the decision to push the safety off. And I continue to sort of keep that bead on the coyote that's coming in front on. Just as I do this, much to my surprise, obviously, because I'm sort of waiting for the 3, 2, 1, I hear a suppressed shot of a rifle squeeze off and watches the coyote that I'm sort of tracking turn from dead on and he's now sort of exiting the scene, running very, very quickly out to the right. And instinctively, I've just switched off safety. I was, tracking or had a bead on that coyote. I very quickly sort of fire off 2 rounds at this fleeing coyote before it crosses a point where it's no longer safe for me to shoot, like it's gone outside of my shooting angle. And as I sort of make the gun safe, click the safety on, I'm sort of just following the coyote with, the gun safe. I hear another shot crack, and crack it did. It sounded like it hit the coyote. And as I watched, I literally saw this coyote flip and be running from the right to do a bit of a cartwheel and flipped in sight and then came to rest. And I ranged where this coyote was laying and it was 420 meters away. And I was pretty amazed that this rancher had fired, this shot hit this coyote in the neck at 420 meters. And it was pretty impressive considering the first shot was what I'd consider a chip shot at less than 100 with this coyote coming front on and he missed. And then obviously cracked it on the run at 420 meters. So it was a bit of a salvage shot. But again, by the time the dust sort of settled, that second coyote that was coming in with it was nowhere to be seen as expected. So we sort of picked up and went and packed up the coyote and went and, basically got our hands on our first coyote, which was pretty cool. Irongate Knives are an Australian-owned and operated small business. They specialise in quality handmade knives. Whether it's a hunting knife, filleting knife, cleaver, or custom creation, get in touch with the team today and they will take care of you. Sign up to their email list for up-to-date news relating to their weekly knife drops. It's a first-in, first-served system, so be quick. We have just got our hands on a few knives from their range and they are super impressive. They make epic gifts for a friend or loved one and will last generations. It's not often that you can say that a tool will outlast its owner, but that's a fact when talking about quality blades. Check out Irongate Knives today by visiting irongateknives.com. So my initial impressions of these animals is they're much larger than one would think. To be honest, they're the size of an adult dog or like a big, I'd say kelpie, definitely. Even maybe like a thin, sort of lanky blue heeler for those that know their dog breeds here in Australia. This particular animal was a mature adult male. And again, they had like a super large set of canines. And obviously just being a wild animal compared to our domestic pets and dogs, just ball of muscle, like very much all muscle. And it quickly became apparent as to how effective these things were at killing, especially when they're in packs. Like this was just one animal. And you could picture that, this is a coyote. You see in the documentaries and the videos of how big, animals like wolves and things are. And that's where it starts getting scary and very quickly apparent just how effective these guys would be at killing deer and pronghorn and whatnot. And, to this point of the trip, as I've said a couple of times now, we've seen multiple kills on both mule deer and pronghorn. And after inspecting this coyote, we obviously worked out just why they're doing the damage. Like, they're very impressive sort of apex predators in this environment, which, again, we took everything in and then ultimately moved off to our third and final stand for the evening. So this was very much about redemption for me. In this third stand, immediately my mind sort of shifted and changed while getting set up. I was sort of less concerned about, just seeing a coyote. That doubt in my mind as to, or expectation had sort of been filled that, if we sit here and call for long enough, something will come in. So I was now a bit more attentive. And to be honest, I think I'd made the decision or the switch in my mindset that this is my chance to shoot one. I knew the night was getting on. It was getting a bit late. And I actually reminded our friend, the other rancher with the other rifle, of the 3-2-1 method, which was a bit of tongue-in-cheek at the time. But, we laughed about it. I just made sure he knew exactly what 3-2-1 meant and that we had to say it verbally to be able to do it. And then, we laughed, as I said, as the electronic caller started playing a mix of calls. And at this stand, we sort of started with our coyote pup in distress, which was working really well just because there were so many pups on the landscape. After nothing had come in, we then started doing like a house cat screeching sort of noise. We did chipmunks chattering. We did rabbits in distress calls, all over, 15, 20 minutes, however long it was. And then we sort of ultimately found ourselves ending back up on the coyote pup in distress call. And at about that same time, I couldn't help but notice a bright white shape in the scope around 200 meters away. And no one else had seen it to this point. And as I sort of zoomed in and focused the scope, I whispered coyote. Like, it quickly became just through, as soon as I focused it, it was not a deer. It couldn't have been anything else. This was in very good resolution and sort of clarity and sharpness, a coyote, and it was looking sort of straight at us. And very quickly, the other shooter or the rancher moved over to me just to get the same sort of trajectory and same view. And again, quickly, he confirmed what we were seeing, and together we got set up. And this time we started the slow yet deliberate countdown from 3. So we both said 3. I kept focused on the coyote at this point, whispered 2, and then at this point my reticle was, stable, hovering over the center of the coyote's neck as it was positioned front on. And then we both said 1, and it went bang. And in a second of sort of slow motion brilliance, I guess, I watched as the coyote in my scope that I'd been, aiming at flailed to the ground. And it actually wasn't until afterwards, as my brain sort of pieced together the previous few seconds or two, that I actually realized that, funny enough, there was only one single shot, and I knew that I had definitely pulled the trigger, which was nice feeling to get, that we'd finally got to the 3-2-1, and on one I'd pulled. And I remember just laughing out of, a bit of confusion and saying, "Did you shoot?" Like, questioning this rancher. And I think in my heart, I actually knew the answer, that he hadn't shot, because I'd only heard one bang of the rifle, but I kind of wasn't sure that maybe there was a chance that I'd missed it in, the speed of obviously counting down, shooting. Both rifles were suppressed. And that's when my brain actually surmised that, this rancher must have felt bad for taking the shots earlier and not doing the 3-2-1. So he gave me this coyote as a bit of a gift and just thought, I'll let him shoot, but I'll make sure he shoots by doing 3-2-1 and he'll shoot on 1, and some sort of mind games. But then I quickly realized, again, like as if comically, that he definitely had in fact squeezed off a shot. But what was really funny, it turns out that he had definitely pulled the trigger, was intending to shoot this coyote as well at the same time, and just, 3-2-1, both of us sending around towards it. it's funny because he just hadn't actually chambered around. So when he squeezed the trigger, it made a small little click, but it obviously didn't shoot a bullet at the coyote. So it was a pretty cool way of actually working out who had shot this coyote. It wasn't, I guess, it was a team effort in the grand scheme of things, but very much could identify that I was the sole one that pulled the trigger and shot it at 200 yards. So that was really cool to be able to obviously achieve that. And it was pretty funny. Like once we'd obviously laughed at the situation, made the gun safe, we went down and over to inspect the coyote, which was a little bit difficult to find, I must admit. We left the guys up there and James and I went down to grab it in the darkness, and we took a head torch. Well, we probably should have taken the handheld binocular and looked for the blood or the coyote, because once we got down there, the brush was a little bit taller than we had initially thought. And anyhow, after a bit of searching, finally found it. And it turned out that it was a sort of adolescent or a pup, like a sort of pup that had come out of the den and that type of stuff earlier that year. So by no means a big solid adult or anything like that, but I couldn't be happier. Again, after seeing the effects that these incredible predators were having on the deer population where we were hunting, I was just happy to sort of help contribute to their control. The ranchers obviously loved it, just because they, raise cattle and stuff like that, and taking one of them, again, one coyote and me shooting one coyote is obviously going to do very little as far as population control and all that type of stuff. Yet, again, for them, the whole thing for me was just a great insight into the work and the lines of predator control that they undertake, with their thermal hunting for these coyotes, with the assault rifles, and ultimately like the electronic game callers. It was just all very insightful, all very new. And by this stage, again, it was like 12:30. We packed everything up, packed all the gear, headed back to, base camp where we'd sort of met them. And then ultimately we thanked them. We're very grateful, obviously. And it then got to around 1 a.m., said our goodbyes. And on the drive home, James and I shared, a similar recount to, what you guys have obviously just heard. It's just that we recorded this sort of podcast live at the time. But as you would have heard, it didn't save correctly. So this version will have to do.
Venture Hunting and Outdoors is Australia's premier hunting retailer, with the mission to give Australian outdoorsmen and women the resource they deserve. Venture started from a team of passionate hunters and has transformed into a community. Through group events, top quality gear, exclusive deals, and expert guidance, Venture is more than a hunting store. Check out their website today to see what epic deals are available.
That is all for today, legends. Again, a little bit longer probably than the half an hour drive home. Just being able to add in that little bit of biology and things like that into today's podcast, relive some of the excitement. I still get pretty excited talking about both the sharptail hunting and the shooting coyotes. It's definitely more adrenaline filled than the bow hunting, because bow hunting is obviously like that 1% adrenaline when you do shoot the animal at the end, whereas this was just exciting and action-packed, and you're running around. It's a bit more fast-paced, but ultimately, I hope you all enjoyed this podcast on shooting sharptails and coyotes. Honestly, it's created some incredible memories for James and I whilst over in the US. I think the fact that it's so different to the bow hunting we experienced was pretty refreshing, and being able to do it with others in the form of bird hunting and with the bird hunters and hunting with the ranchers for the coyotes was super fun. And again, the camaraderie was great. As part of that, James and I wanted to give a special thanks to those people who made this experience possible. You guys all know who you are. We appreciate your hospitality, friendship, and ultimately the opportunity to experience this new pursuits. But that is all for today's podcast. Thank you all for listening. As you guys are hearing this, we are going to be in the middle of Cape York, far north Queensland, Australia, hunting feral pigs with the lads from Cayuga Adventures. We've got the invite to go up there and couldn't refuse. So not only do they make the best broadheads on the market, the team cater for some incredible boar hunting opportunities in the tropics of North Queensland, Australia. And James and I are pretty keen to try and target a mature hooky boar with the bows up there in the heat. It's going to be the middle of November, so extremely hot and sticky conditions, but we want you guys to stay tuned for some upcoming stories where we'll obviously break down what is sure to be an epic adventure. Heading into Christmas, we are doing a mega 20% off sale on all prints across the Twin Elements website. Use code TWIN20 for 20% off the perfect gift for a friend, yourself, or a family member this holidays. As always, we appreciate your support. Those prints are available on the Twin Elements website. Lastly, please continue to subscribe, review, and rate this podcast. We truly appreciate your support and are trying to grow this as a bit of a story recount, a bit of an informative platform, and just another way that we can talk to you guys, relate to you guys. Please continue to send in your FAQs to info@twinelements.com.au, and James and I will try and answer them as promptly as possible. And the last thing I'll mention is keep an eye out on our YouTube channel for uploads. We have plenty of content about to drop. We have a USA vlog style of film coming out in late 2025. We also have hunts from the Red Deer Raw from this year about to drop just in time for the rut. So keep an eye out there. Again, some incredible content that we've captured on these adventures, and we look forward to sharing with you guys soon. That's all for me from today. Thank you, legends, from the bottom of my heart, and I will see you all next week on the Twin Elements podcast. Cheers.